Iran, known as Persia in ancient times, plays a surprisingly significant role in the biblical narrative. While nations like Israel, Egypt, and Babylon often capture the spotlight in prophecy, Persia is a key part of God's story, standing out with a unique place in both the Old and New Testaments. This influence begins far back in history, with roots stretching into the lineage of Noah's descendants, particularly Japheth's son, Madai. This connection links Iran's people to one of the earliest biblical lineages, establishing them as a notable group among the nations from the very start. As history unfolds, the Medes and Persians emerge, forming the Medo-Persian Empire, one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. It's here that Persia first steps into the biblical narrative in a dramatic way. The Medo-Persian Empire not only shaped the politics and culture of the ancient world, but also played a role in God's unfolding plan for his chosen people, Israel. In a time when Israel was subject to the dominance of larger, more powerful nations, the Medo-Persian Empire impacted their fate in profound ways. One of the most significant figures in this empire was Cyrus the Great, the Persian king known for his unprecedented approach to governance and his tolerance toward conquered peoples. This approach would become a turning point for the Jewish people, who were in exile in Babylon after the destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple. Cyrus conquered Babylon and issued a decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland, rebuild Jerusalem, and restore the Temple. This decree wasn't a random act of kindness. It was an act of prophetic fulfillment. More than a century before Cyrus's birth, the prophet Isaiah specifically named him as the one chosen by God to liberate Israel. Isaiah refers to Cyrus as God's shepherd and his anointed, terms that are usually reserved for Israelite leaders. This designation signals a rare role for a pagan king within God's divine plan. By bringing Cyrus into the prophecy, the Bible presents Persia as a nation used by God for his purposes, even though it wasn't a part of the covenant people of Israel. The Medo-Persian Empire's unique role highlights an important biblical theme: God's sovereignty over all nations, not just Israel. While Israel is the primary focus of biblical prophecy, other nations, including Persia, are shown to serve specific roles in the grand narrative. Through Persia, God accomplishes his will for Israel, illustrating how his plans can transcend borders, cultures, and beliefs. This idea reinforces the message that God's control and purpose are not limited to any one nation or people. The influence of Persia in the Bible goes beyond political power. It also includes cultural and spiritual contributions that left a lasting impact on the Jewish people and their faith. The decree of Cyrus is celebrated in the book of Ezra as a moment of divine intervention, marking the beginning of Israel's restoration after a period of exile and suffering. This significant event is part of the larger narrative in which Persia's kings, policies, and tolerance towards different faiths paved the way for Israel's spiritual and cultural renewal. Throughout the Bible, Persia's role serves as a reminder that God can use any nation to fulfill his prophecies. The story of Cyrus and Persia challenges us to see beyond the usual boundaries of faith and nationality, understanding that God's sovereignty encompasses all nations, using them in unexpected ways to achieve his plans. Cyrus the Great holds a pivotal place in biblical prophecy, standing out as an unlikely yet profoundly influential figure. This Persian king, known for his military prowess and unique style of leadership, forever changed the course of Israel's history. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, he found himself ruling over the Jewish people, who were living in exile after the devastating destruction of Jerusalem and their temple. Rather than subjecting the Israelites to further oppression, Cyrus made a decision that shocked the ancient world. He allowed them to return to their homeland. This decree from Cyrus wasn't just a political move. Long before his birth, the prophet Isaiah spoke of a man named Cyrus who would fulfill God's will by liberating Israel. Isaiah's prophecy, found in chapters 44 and 45, names Cyrus specifically, describing him as God's shepherd and his anointed. These titles are rare for a foreign king, especially one outside of Israel's covenant with God. Yet, Cyrus is referred to with these honorifics, illustrating his unique role in the divine plan. This prophecy came over a century before Cyrus's life, showcasing the foresight and precision of the biblical prophecies. Cyrus's actions, as prophesied by Isaiah, transformed him from merely a conqueror into a liberator. His decree allowed the Israelites to return to Jerusalem, rebuild their lives, and restore their temple, a monumental task that symbolized more than just the reconstruction of a physical structure. For the Jewish people, the rebuilding of the temple meant the restoration of their faith, culture, and identity after years of displacement and despair. This was a fulfillment of a deep longing and promise, and Cyrus, a foreign king, was the unexpected instrument of this restoration. The decree by Cyrus is recorded in the book of Ezra, where it's celebrated as a divine intervention. In Ezra, we see the Israelites responding with joy and reverence to Cyrus's unexpected kindness and God's provision. They took this opportunity to not only rebuild their temple, but also renew their commitment to their faith. The entire event underscores an essential biblical theme: God's sovereignty. In the Bible, God's ability to use a king like Cyrus, from a pagan nation, demonstrates that his plans are beyond human limitations or expectations. Cyrus's role reminds believers that God's control extends over all people and nations, orchestrating events in ways that may seem unlikely or impossible from a human perspective. Cyrus's decree, however, didn't just benefit the Jewish people in Jerusalem. His policies toward religious tolerance and cultural respect influenced how other nations interacted with their subjects, setting a precedent for later empires. By allowing people to return to their homelands and honor their gods, Cyrus built a unique form of unity among the diverse peoples of his empire. This not only stabilized his reign, but also showed how tolerance and compassion could be effective tools of governance. In the context of biblical prophecy, Cyrus is celebrated as a key figure, not only because of his political achievement, but because of how his life aligned with God's purpose for Israel. His story is a reminder that God's plans often involve unexpected people and places, bringing forth his promises in ways that reveal his wisdom and power. For Israel, Cyrus was more than a king. He was a beacon of hope, a living testament to God's faithfulness, and a reminder that, even in exile, they were not forgotten. The Book of Esther offers a compelling glimpse into Persia's role in preserving the Jewish people during a time of great peril. Set during the reign of King Ahasuerus, commonly identified as King Xerxes I of Persia, this story highlights a pivotal moment when the Jewish people faced extermination. At the heart of this tale is Esther, a young Jewish woman who rises to an extraordinary position of influence as Queen of Persia. Her story underscores how Persia, though a foreign nation, became a vessel for God's protection over his chosen people. Esther's journey begins in unexpected circumstances. She was an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, a Jewish man who held a respected position within the Persian community. When Queen Vashti was removed from her position, a search began across the empire to find a new queen. Through this unlikely turn of events, Esther, a Jewish girl from a displaced community, was chosen to become queen, placing her in a position of influence within the Persian royal court. The story takes a dark turn when Haman, an influential advisor to the king, harbors a deep-seated hatred for the Jewish people, particularly Mordecai, who had refused to bow down to him. In his quest for vengeance, Haman crafts a plan to annihilate the Jewish population across the Persian Empire, securing a decree from the king that sanctions this genocide. The fate of an entire people rests on a single decree, and it appears as though Persia, once a nation that helped restore Israel through Cyrus, now threatens to extinguish them. In this dire situation, Esther's courage and faith shine brightly. Mordecai, realizing the gravity of the situation, urges Esther to use her position to intervene on behalf of her people. However, approaching the king uninvited was dangerous, even for the queen, as it could result in her execution. Despite the risk, Esther decides to act, famously declaring, "If I perish, I perish." With wisdom and bravery, she approaches the king, revealing Haman's plot and her own identity as a Jew. Her bold action turns the tide, leading to the king's decision to protect the Jewish people and punish Haman instead. The Jewish people were saved from extermination, and this moment of salvation became a defining story of resilience and faith. The Book of Esther illustrates how Persia, under the rule of a foreign king, became an unexpected protector of the Jewish people. This moment of divine intervention is celebrated annually in the Jewish festival of Purim, commemorating the courage of Esther and the preservation of the Jewish people through God's providence. The significance of this story goes beyond historical or cultural preservation. The tale of Esther and Persia's role in saving the Jews is a powerful reminder of God's ability to use individuals and nations for His purposes, even when they do not appear to be aligned with His people. It highlights how God can work within foreign kingdoms and secular governments to bring about His plans, using unlikely heroes to accomplish extraordinary acts of deliverance. Persia's involvement in the story of Esther reflects a broader biblical theme of God's sovereignty. Even within a pagan empire, far removed from Israel's covenant, God's hand guided events to ensure the survival of His people. This story serves as an enduring symbol of hope and divine protection, reminding believers that God's power and presence are not confined by geographical or political boundaries. Through the actions of Esther and the unexpected intervention of Persia, we see a powerful message of faith, courage, and the unyielding promise of God's protection over His people. The book of Daniel offers a fascinating view of Persia's role in God's prophetic timeline. Through visions and dreams given to Daniel, Persia is depicted as a critical player in the unfolding events of world history, influencing Israel and the nations that would follow. These visions provide a sweeping overview of successive empires, revealing the way each would rise and fall according to God's sovereign plan. Persia, along with the Medes, is central to these prophecies, represented through vivid imagery that foreshadows its power and eventual defeat. One of the earliest references to Persia in Daniel's visions appears in the interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2. In this dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees a colossal statue made of different materials, symbolizing a series of empires that would dominate the ancient world. The head of gold represents Babylon, followed by the chest and arms of silver, symbolizing the Medo-Persian Empire. This empire, with its united strength and influence, would conquer Babylon and establish itself as the next dominant power. The silver chest and arms highlight Persia's enduring strength and unity, portraying it as a force that would play a significant role in shaping history. In Daniel chapter 7, Persia appears again in a separate vision, this time as a bear raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth. This bear symbolizes the Medo-Persian Empire's immense strength and its aggressive conquests over other nations. The raised side represents the dominance of Persia within the Medo-Persian partnership, and the 3 ribs signify the major conquests of Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. This imagery highlights Persia's reach and influence, showing how it would overpower other nations, yet its time of dominance would eventually come to an end. Daniel's prophetic insights go further in chapter 8, where he sees a vision of a ram with 2 horns. The ram represents the Medo-Persian Empire, with one horn higher than the other, symbolizing Persia's eventual dominance over the Medes. In the vision, this powerful ram charges in various directions, symbolizing Persia's conquests and its expansive reach. However, the vision also depicts the ram's eventual defeat by a goat with a single large horn, symbolizing Greece and its swift, decisive conquest under Alexander the Great. This prophecy captures the rise and fall of Persia, emphasizing that even the mightiest empires are subject to God's plan. The influence of Persia extended beyond its military power. The empire's policies of religious tolerance and cultural integration left a lasting impact, influencing how subsequent empires, including the Greeks and Romans, would approach governance. Persia's respect for different religious practices allowed Judaism to flourish during this period, and this cultural climate helped set the stage for the eventual spread of Christianity. The connections Persia fostered among different regions and people laid groundwork that would have spiritual and cultural significance far beyond its time of political dominance. Daniel's visions not only highlight Persia's place in God's prophetic plan, but also reinforce the theme of divine sovereignty over human history. By revealing the rise and fall of empires, Daniel's prophecies remind believers that no kingdom, no matter how powerful, can escape God's ultimate authority. Persia, with all its achievements and influence, served a purpose within a larger divine framework. Its role in these prophecies underscores the truth that God is in control of all nations, orchestrating the course of history to fulfill his promises and his will. Through these visions, the book of Daniel presents Persia as more than just an ancient empire. Persia becomes a symbol of God's ability to shape events across nations and generations, using each kingdom as part of his design. For those who study these prophecies, Persia's rise and fall serve as a reminder of the enduring nature of God's plan, one that continues to unfold through the shifting tides of history. Persia's influence extends beyond political and military power, leaving a lasting spiritual legacy that even appears in the New Testament. This legacy is most famously seen in the story of the Magi, or wise men from the East, who visited the young Jesus. Many biblical scholars believe that these Magi were from Persia, or at least deeply influenced by Persian culture and religion. Their journey to find the newborn King of the Jews reflects a profound spiritual connection between Persia and the prophetic hope within Israel's tradition. The Magi were scholars and spiritual figures, often associated with astrology, divination, and the study of sacred texts. In Persian society, they held high status as wise men and advisors, particularly within the Zoroastrian faith, which was one of the dominant religions of the region. Zoroastrianism, with its emphasis on dualistic forces of good and evil and the eventual triumph of righteousness, held ideas that resonated with some elements of Jewish thought. This cultural exchange likely influenced the worldview of the Magi, making them receptive to prophecies and signs pointing to a future savior. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Magi's appearance is significant because it shows that Persia's spiritual influence reached into the heart of the New Testament narrative. Guided by a star, these wise men undertook a long journey to Bethlehem to honor the birth of Jesus, recognizing him as a king foretold in ancient prophecies. Their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh were symbolic offerings, often seen as representing Jesus' roles as king, priest, and sacrificial savior. This gesture from the Magi not only honored Jesus, but also acknowledged the fulfillment of prophecies that had roots in both Jewish and broader ancient traditions, including those from the East. The Magi's visit reveals how Persia's spiritual traditions and openness to other beliefs allowed for a connection with Jewish messianic expectations. Persia had a long-standing tradition of religious tolerance, evident since the time of Cyrus the Great, who allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This cultural respect created an environment where ideas from different faiths could circulate and influence one another. By the time of Jesus' birth, the Magi were attuned to prophecies and signs, likely due to Persia's unique blend of spiritual traditions and openness to wisdom from diverse sources. Persia's influence on the Magi also speaks to a larger biblical theme, God's plan extending beyond the borders of Israel to include all nations. The presence of these Persian wise men at the nativity scene symbolizes the global reach of God's promise and foreshadows the spread of the gospel beyond the Jewish people. The Magi's journey to Bethlehem reflects a universal longing for truth and redemption, illustrating that the search for divine truth is not limited to one culture or nation. The story of the Magi is a reminder of Persia's lasting impact, both as a historical empire and as a spiritual force. While Persia was not part of the covenant people of Israel, it became an instrument of God's purposes in profound ways, from Cyrus's decree to the Magi's journey. Persia's legacy shows how God can use individuals from diverse backgrounds to reveal his plans and bring his light into the world. The book of Ezekiel contains some of the most intriguing and debated prophecies in the Bible, especially those found in chapters 38 and 39, which describe a future war involving a coalition of nations led by figures known as Gog and Magog. Persia is specifically mentioned as one of the key nations in this coalition, joining forces with other powerful entities to come against Israel. This prophecy has been the subject of extensive analysis and discussion, as it suggests a significant role for Persia, or modern-day Iran, in events that many believe are yet to come. Ezekiel's prophecy begins with a description of a coalition of nations gathered under the leadership of Gog, from the land of Magog. These nations are said to come from the far north and align themselves in a final attempt to attack Israel. Alongside Magog, Persia, Cush, and Put are named, indicating a coalition that spans from the Middle East to regions in Africa. Persia's inclusion in this alliance is particularly noteworthy because it signals that the nation will play a significant role in opposing Israel in this prophesied conflict. Ezekiel describes this coalition as descending on Israel like a storm, catching the nation by surprise. The prophecy suggests that the sheer size and power of this coalition will be overwhelming, making it appear that Israel stands no chance against the oncoming forces. However, as the prophecy unfolds, it becomes clear that this war is not simply a military conflict. It is a demonstration of God's power and his commitment to protect his people. Despite the formidable alliance, God intervenes directly, displaying his might in a way that leaves no doubt about his sovereignty. According to Ezekiel, God's intervention is dramatic and unmistakable. The prophecy details natural disasters, including a massive earthquake, hailstones, fire, and sulfur, that will devastate the invading forces. These events are portrayed as acts of divine judgment against the nations that sought to harm Israel. In the aftermath, the world will recognize God's power and his special relationship with Israel. This prophecy highlights a recurring biblical theme, that God is ultimately in control of history, and he will act to fulfill his promises to Israel, regardless of the opposition they may face. The significance of Persia's involvement in this prophecy lies in its position as a key part of a larger coalition against Israel. The mention of Persia alongside Magog and other nations reinforces the idea that in the end times, Israel will face opposition not just from neighboring countries, but from a broad alliance representing various regions and powers. This prophecy has fueled much speculation about how modern nations may align in the future, and the potential role of Iran in such events. While interpretations vary, many see the mention of Persia in this prophecy as a sign that Iran's relationship with Israel will be significant in the unfolding of end-time events. Ezekiel's vision of the war of Gog and Magog serves as both a warning and a message of hope. It warns of a time when powerful forces will seek to destroy Israel, yet it also reassures believers that God's protective hand will not be withdrawn. Through this prophecy, Persia's future role is both ominous and integral, showing how God's plan includes not only nations that stand with Israel, but also those that come against it. The prophecy of Gog and Magog reminds believers of the ongoing relevance of biblical prophecy and the enduring significance of nations like Persia within these ancient texts. It suggests that Persia, much like in past centuries, may once again find itself at the center of pivotal events that reveal God's sovereignty over the nations. Persia's journey through biblical history is remarkable, presenting a nation that consistently appears in crucial moments of God's plan. From Cyrus the Great's decree that allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem, to the courage of Esther that preserved Israel from destruction, Persia stands as a unique player among the empires of the ancient world. Its influence is not limited to its immediate era. Persia's legacy spans centuries, touching on spiritual, cultural, and prophetic themes that resonate throughout the Bible. In the prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel, Persia emerges not just as a historical empire, but as a nation symbolically entwined in God's grand design for the world. Daniel's visions highlight Persia's role in the succession of empires, demonstrating how God can use the rise and fall of kingdoms to shape his will. Persia's eventual defeat by Greece, foreseen in Daniel's prophecy, is yet another reminder that no earthly power is permanent before God's authority. In Ezekiel's vision of the war of Gog and Magog, Persia appears again as a future player in a coalition of nations, emphasizing that its significance extends into end-time prophecy. Persia's connection to the story of the Magi in the New Testament further illustrates its lasting spiritual legacy. The wise men from the East, likely influenced by Persia's religious traditions, recognized the birth of Jesus as a fulfillment of prophecies and traveled to honor him. This moment encapsulates Persia's openness to spiritual truth and its enduring connection to the search for divine wisdom. It reminds believers that God's reach extends across borders, cultures, and empires, using people from all nations to reveal his light. The Bible's portrayal of Persia underscores a profound message. God's sovereignty is not limited to any single nation or people. Persia's role in biblical history challenges us to see the larger picture, where even those outside the covenant with Israel can be instruments of God's purpose. Persia's kings, policies, and actions reveal a God who works through all nations, directing the course of history according to his wisdom. This narrative reminds believers of the unchanging nature of God's promises, his protection over his people, and his control over the destiny of nations. In studying Persia's role in the Bible, we gain a deeper understanding of how God's plan encompasses the entire world. Persia's place in prophecy serves as a testament to the truth that no empire, however powerful, can stand outside of God's influence. The stories of Cyrus, Esther, and the Magi from the East are reminders of God's faithfulness, his justice, and his desire to bring people from all nations into his story. As history unfolds, Persia's role remains a powerful example of how God uses unexpected paths to fulfill his promises. For those who look to the Bible for insight into past, present, and future events, Persia offers a fascinating perspective on how God's hand moves through time, using nations and individuals alike to accomplish his will. And with that, we've concluded our journey through the remarkable role that Persia, or modern-day Iran, plays in biblical history and prophecy. From supporting the Jewish return to Jerusalem to Esther's bravery and the spiritual symbolism of the Magi, Persia demonstrates how God uses nations and people of all backgrounds to fulfill his purposes. If this topic intrigued you, and you want to continue exploring the impact of biblical prophecies and the roles of other figures and nations in sacred history, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, we dive deep into biblical and historical themes that enrich our understanding of the world and our faith. So, don't miss out. Follow the channel, give this video a like, and join us on this journey to uncover even more insights. Thank you for watching.